Dubro Suspicion Files.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into what is really the absolute foundation of the modern world.
Right.
The one piece of infrastructure that, well, it pretty much controls everything. We're talking trillion-dollar financial markets, instant military communications, and yet it remains almost completely invisible.
And that invisibility, that's really the key, isn't it? It's
Yes.
the key to understanding the sheer fragility of our digital lives. There's this common and, very pervasive misconception that the entire digital world, your video streams, your high-frequency stock trades, the cloud you rely on runs primarily on satellites.
Right. People picture data packets just, bouncing weightlessly through space. It sounds clean. It sounds futuristic.
It does, but it's just not true.
It's the great technological lie we've all sort of tacitly accepted. So the core reality check we have to start with is this. Over 95% of all international data is not fluting through the atmosphere.
Nope.
It is physical. It is on the seabed.
It's a colossal, sprawling physical network. I mean, it's probably the largest infrastructure project in human history that most people just don't know exists.
That's an incredible statement.
But it's true. We're talking about more than 600 active submarine cables, which, if you laid them all end to end, would cover an astonishing 1.4 million kilometers.
1.4 million.
All across the ocean floor, linking every single continent except, Antarctica.
And here is the fact that I think should shift your perception of this entirely. This infrastructure, it isn't some kind of, military-grade armored conduit.
Not even close.
For long stretches, these absolutely vital lifelines are dimensionally similar to a common garden hose.
A garden hose, it sounds absurd, but that's the reality for much of their length. The protective layers around the actual fiber optics are thin. They're designed for weight and flexibility, not for impact resistance.
A garden hose that is supporting the entire global economy.
And we really have to quantify the stakes to understand the risk here.
Yeah.
Through those fragile-looking tubes, an estimated $10 trillion in financial transactions pass.
Every single day.
Every single day. The speed of our world, the instantaneous nature of finance, of diplomacy, and yes, of modern warfare, it all depends entirely on the integrity of this single, critical, yet almost completely unseen physical network.
And I guess as long as they're unseen, we just assume they're safe.
Exactly.
Until they break. Or until they break in a way that suggests something far more sinister than just, bad luck.
Which brings us to the geopolitical turning point that really launched this whole discussion. We're talking about the cluster failure in the Baltic Sea back in October of 2023.
Specifically October 8th, 2023. And it wasn't just one thing. We saw two immediate events happen in the same vicinity at basically the same time.
Right.
First, the Baltic Connector gas pipeline, which is a major energy artery between Finland and Estonia, it ruptured violently.
And at almost the exact same time.
Two separate critical telecommunications cables also just went dark. So it was a simultaneous, highly coordinated-looking cluster of damage hitting three different types of infrastructure: energy, data, and communication, all vital to NATO countries.
That unprecedented cluster failure and the pattern of similar incidents that followed it, that immediately sparked a really unsettling theory. It elevated this way beyond mere maintenance issues.
So the theory is what?
The theory is this. This was not simply an accident. That these incidents are, in fact, the first confirmed shots in a new, sophisticated, unseen hybrid war.
A war waged by state actors, often attributed to Russia or China.
Yep, designed to sever Western digital lifelines while, and this is the crucial part, simultaneously maintaining perfect, plausible deniability.
So that's our mission today. We are the investigators. We've got the forensic reports, the claims, the rebuttals, the intelligence speculation. We need to determine if this pattern is definitive proof of intentional sabotage or if we're just falling prey to a compelling story that happens to fit perfectly with our growing global anxieties.
And we have to start with the statistical armor that protects any potential perpetrator.
Right.
Before we can even begin to look for evidence of a high-stakes conspiracy or an intentional hybrid war, we have to establish the most powerful rebuttal against that idea. And that rebuttal is purely, relentlessly statistical.
The numbers are often the most sober counterpoint to our natural tendency toward drama, aren't they?
They really are. And our primary source for this counterargument is the International Cable Protection Committee, the ICPC.
Okay.
They track and they manage data on cable faults globally, and their data suggests that this alleged unseen war is really just constant, highly predictable, and often very clumsy commercial accidents.
So cable faults aren't rare events that signal a crisis. They're just the norm.
They're the norm of operating a massive underwater network.
So if the network is 1.4 million kilometers long, what's the statistical baseline? I mean, how often do these essential lifelines actually snap or get damaged?
Globally, the noise floor, as they call it, is high, very high. We see between 100 and 200 cable faults that require a major repair every single year.
100 to 200.
Every year. So think about that figure. That means that every 2 or 3 days, on average, somewhere in the world, a submarine cable fails.
Yeah.
They're constant. And the overwhelming cause, according to decades of ICPC statistics, is not state-sponsored military action.
Okay, let's nail down that overwhelming cause, because this is the absolute cornerstone of the deniability argument, right?
It is the single most important fact here. A staggering 86% of all subsea cable repairs are directly attributable to accidental damage.
Caused by what?
Caused by fishing and anchoring activities. This 86% truth is the absolute core vulnerability and at the same time the primary defense mechanism for any intentional actor.
86%. That's statistically ironclad. It feels almost absurdly high.
It is. I mean, it almost defies belief, right? You think about this multi-trillion-dollar system.
The backbone of everything.
The backbone of literally everything digital. And you find out that almost 9 times out of 10, the thing that breaks it isn't some high-tech adversary. It's a fishing trawler.
Or a ship captain who just misjudged where to drop anchor.
Exactly. And we can even break that 86% down further, which I think is really important for a deep dive like this.
Yeah, let's get into the weeds on that.
Okay, so of that total, 28% are confirmed, like absolutely confirmed, fishing trawlers dragging heavy nets or rigging across the seabed.
So no ambiguity there. They know it was a fishing boat.
None whatsoever. Then you have another 14% that are confirmed, ship anchors vessels, just misjudging their drop point or being forced to anchor in a prohibited zone during a storm, that kind of thing.
Right.
But then, and this is a really interesting part, you have a huge 44% chunk that's just categorized as suspected fishing or anchoring incidents.
Suspected. So that's where the wiggle room is.
That's where all the wiggle room is. The physical evidence, the scrapes, the crushing damage. It all points to external force, to dragging, but they can't conclusively tie it to a specific vessel.
Which, as we'll see, becomes the perfect cloak for other activity.
A perfect cloak. And just to put that in perspective, all the things you'd think would be the main culprits.
Yeah.
Natural causes, right?
Yeah. Earthquakes, underwater volcanoes, rock slides.
All that. That only accounts for about 7 to 10% of all faults.
Yeah.
It's a rounding error compared to the fishing boats.
That is truly a bizarre asymmetry. The multi-trillion-dollar backbone of global finance and defense is overwhelmingly vulnerable to heavy fishing nets and commercial ship captains misjudging their drop point by a few feet.
And this inherent vulnerability is nothing new. I mean, we have a historical precedent that perfectly illustrates the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Go back to 1850. The very first operational submarine cable was laid between England and France.
Oh, okay.
It was severed almost immediately.
No way. By what?
The culprit, a fisherman. He hooked it, pulled it up, and apparently thought it was some kind of peculiar deep sea plant. He cut a piece out and reportedly showed it off in town, believing he had captured a sea monster.
A sea monster, that was actually the first instantiation of instantaneous global communication. It just underlines the fact that vulnerability is, well, it's baked into the system design from day one.
Exactly. But here is the critical strategic conclusion for our investigation today. This high noise floor of 100 to 200 annual accidents is the single greatest strategic asset for an aggressor.
How so?
It provides perfect statistical cover. If a state actor did want to cut a cable, the act itself would be statistically indistinguishable from a simple daily commercial accident.
So the 86% statistic isn't just a boring detail about maintenance costs.
No.
It's the perfect engine for plausible deniability. If Western intelligence presents evidence of a cut cable, the aggressor simply points to the ICPC data and shrugs, saying, that's just the average day in the life of a seabed cable. Prove our ship wasn't just caught in a storm.
Their greatest alibi is the numerical certainty of human clumsiness and commercial failure. It's an almost perfect defense.
But even knowing that 86% truth, I still find myself resisting it. I want a spy sub, not a rusty anchor. Why is it so hard for us to accept the boring statistical explanation?
Wow.
This is where the statistics meet human psychology, which is section 2 of our deep dive.
Right. And we have to talk about something called proportionality bias.
Proportionality bias.
It's the phenomenon you just articulated.
Ah.
It is a fundamental cognitive shortcut our brain uses. The assumption that significant events must have substantial proportional causes.
Okay.
We are hardwired to deeply resist the idea that a small mundane failure, a loose bolt, a fishing net, a cheap piece of plastic could lead to a catastrophic multi-billion-dollar outcome.
We demand a great effect to have a great cause. If the global network is crippled, our brains want it to be caused by a sophisticated enemy operation, not by a captain having a bad day and dragging his anchor.
It really speaks to the human desire for a narrative that matches the scale of the tragedy. It is the exact same psychological dissonance we experienced following the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger explosion.
Right.
A $14 billion vehicle, 7 lives lost, a national crisis of confidence, and the cause...
Not sabotage.
Not sabotage, not a fundamental flaw in the primary design, but the failure of a single 50-cent rubber O-ring that just became brittle in cold temperatures.
The technical cause was mundane material failure, yet the magnitude of the consequence screams conspiracy or catastrophe. The mind just recoils from the idea that a small, simple failure can have such a large impact.
And this bias isn't just limited to us, the casual observers. It has major implications for intelligence and defense planning.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. If intelligence agencies allocate vast resources to monitoring sophisticated, high-tech threats, like those Russian deep-sea research submersibles we hear about, because they look like proportional threats.
They seem like the right size of threat for the system.
Exactly. Then they might divert attention away from the real deniable threat. A simple commercial vessel utilizing a $10 anchor. This bias can skew resource allocation toward the dramatic and away from the effective.
That is a fascinating point. So our own psychological resistance to the boring truth becomes a strategic vulnerability if we assume the enemy has to use these proportional high-tech tools.
It does.
But we have to ask the counter question, right? What if the accidents aren't random? What if they all happen in the same place at the same time in the middle of a geopolitical crisis?
And that introduces the second powerful psychological factor at play here, patternicity.
Patternicity?
It's the brain's innate wiring to seek out meaningful patterns, even in random data. It's essential for survival, right?
Yeah.
Spotting a predator in the shadows.
Sure.
But in the context of analyzing global events, the risk is connecting dots that are truly random versus creating an illusion of a pattern that simply fits a pre-existing fear narrative.
So when we see 3 separate incidents hitting NATO infrastructure in the Baltic, our patternicity immediately screams coordinated campaign.
Right.
Even if the ICPC data says, statistically, that's just 3 unlucky commercial ships.
Exactly. We are naturally suspicious when random events cease to be random. And our task now, in reviewing these case files, is to hold both the statistics, that 86% truth, and our innate psychological biases in check.
To see if the patterns we're seeing are real indicators of intent, or if they're just psychological illusions we're overlaying on random data.
We have to proceed with a lot of forensic caution.
Okay. Then let's begin our review of the contentious case files, and let's start in a theater where the lines between accident and attack are already thoroughly blurred by active conflict. The Red Sea, case file 001.
This incident took place in late February of 2024, and it was right when the conflict with the Houthi rebels in Yemen was at its peak. They were actively attacking international shipping lanes in response to the war in Gaza.
And the initial claim was sabotage.
Immediately. The claim was deliberate Houthi sabotage of digital infrastructure.
And to be fair, the circumstantial evidence was pretty compelling.
It was. On February 24th, 3 separate critical subsea cables were severed. The CECOM, the AAE-1, and the EIG. All of them are vital arteries running through that very narrow Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
And this wasn't totally out of the blue. There was chatter beforehand.
Weeks before this actual incident, a Telegram channel linked to the Houthis published a map. And this map showed the exact paths of the submarine cables running through the Red Sea.
Effectively labeling them as targets.
That's how it was seen. And Yemen's internationally recognized government, which opposes the Houthis, immediately issued a stark public warning, saying they feared the rebels were planning to sabotage this critical infrastructure.
So when the cables went down, in that hyper-politicized environment, it looked like a calculated, deliberate escalation of the conflict.
An escalation aimed squarely at the global economy.
The Houthis, though, they stuck rigorously to their defense of plausible deniability.
Of course. They denied targeting the cables directly. Instead, they blamed British and U.S. military operations for the damage, though they offered no specific evidence to back up that counterclaim.
The classic expected denials.
But the truly fascinating part of this case is where the forensic evidence led. It pointed away from a diver or a mini-sub and toward what U.S. officials and the ICPC eventually concluded was the bank shot theory.
Okay. The bank shot theory.
We have to rewind a little bit to February 18th, which was days before the cables were actually cut. Houthi missiles struck the Ruby Mar.
The Ruby Mar, that was a British-owned, Belize-flagged commercial cargo vessel.
That's the one. The crew abandoned the crippled ship shortly after the strike.
Right.
And as they evacuated, they attempted to drop the ship's anchor to stabilize it and halt its drift, which is, a standard procedure for a derelict ship.
But it didn't work.
It failed. So the Ruby Mar, now a 32,000-ton ghost ship, just drifted, completely uncontrolled, for almost 2 full weeks in the busy, narrow maritime corridor of the Red Sea. And all the while, it was dragging its heavy anchor along the crowded seabed.
And the forensic investigators, they were able to map the trajectory of that drifting, crippled vessel.
Precisely. They tracked its drift path, and they correlated it with the cable charts. The ship finally sank on March 2nd. The conclusion drawn by U.S. officials and the International Cable Protection Committee was definitive.
What did they find?
The 3 critical cables were most likely cut by the Ruby Mar's dragging anchor as it drifted along its 14-day uncontrolled journey.
That is an incredible sequence of events. I mean, the sheer statistical unlikelihood of a stricken vessel drifting for 2 weeks and managing to hit 3 critical international data cables must be astronomical.
It's incredible, but it provides us with our working definition for this new reality of conflict.
So we can define this new category as what?
Accidental sabotage.
Accidental sabotage.
The question of intent is complex. Did the Houthis intend to cut the cables with a diver or a remotely operated vehicle? The evidence for that is only circumstantial, but were they responsible for the outcome?
100%.
Absolutely. Their act of war-firing missiles at the Ruby Mar created the instrument of damage, the drifting, dragging anchor.
It's the ultimate bank shot. They can publicly maintain plausible deniability, saying we never touched the cables, while being completely culpable for the catastrophic damage caused by their kinetic military action against a commercial vessel.
And the accident statistics save them from direct attribution and guaranteed deniability.
It highlights how hybrid warfare operates completely outside the expected parameters of traditional conflict.
Right. It uses the ambient environmental risk, in this case, the high statistical noise floor of anchor accidents, as a weapon. It's exploiting the statistical certainty of failure.
That leads us directly into case file 002, the Baltic Sea. And here, the patternicity is, well, it's overwhelming. It starts to look less like a single tragic bank shot accident and more like a deliberate, coordinated campaign.
The Baltic Sea cluster is highly suspicious for a few reasons. First, it involves multiple incidents over a very short span of time.
Right.
Second, they all hit critical national infrastructure targets linked directly to NATO member states: Finland, Estonia, Sweden, Lithuania.
All in the same neighborhood.
And third, the consistency of the damage across all these different targets is what convinces forensic analysts that intent was involved.
Okay, let's lay out the timeline of these 3 cluster incidents, because the pattern of the vessels involved is what sets off alarm bells for intelligence services. First up, the original incident from October 2023.
The Baltic Connector gas pipeline rupture and the 2 adjacent data cables.
Who was the prime suspect identified by Finnish and Estonian investigators?
The vessel identified was the new Polar Bear. It's the Hong Kong-flagged container ship registered to a Chinese shipping firm.
And crucially,
its automatic identification system, its AIS tracker, which ships use to broadcast their location to prevent collisions, was noted as being suspiciously inactive or intermittent in the critical area and time window.
Okay, so that's incident 1. Then we jump forward to November 2024. 2 more cables are severed.
The Sea Lion 1, which connects Finland and Germany, and the BCS East-West Interlink, which connects Sweden and Lithuania, again hitting the critical digital arteries of NATO members.
And the suspect.
The suspect here, the Yipeng 3. Another Chinese-flagged ship, but one that raised suspicion because it had just recently departed a major Russian port and was tracked moving very suspiciously in the area of the breaks. The pattern of vessel origin and flag is starting to build.
And finally, Incident 3 in December 2024, which was a massive simultaneous failure.
It was. The S-Link 2 power cable and 4 adjacent telecommunications cables are cut. The vessel identified in the vicinity was the 𝐃𝐈𝐕𝐄.
And the 𝐃𝐈𝐕𝐄 is significant because
The 𝐃𝐈𝐕𝐄 was quickly identified as an oil tanker belonging to what is internationally known as Russia's shadow fleet.
Okay, what's a shadow fleet?
It's a fleet composed of older, often poorly maintained tankers, usually sold for scrap, but they're reflagged under jurisdictions with lax oversight. And they're used specifically to move Russian oil and evade Western sanctions.
So this links the incident directly to a high-risk, deniable asset of a state actor.
Exactly.
And in all three of these major cluster incidents, the forensic evidence was identical. It pointed to one single mechanism.
Yes, the consistency is key here. The evidence points to a heavy anchor being dragged for miles along the seabed, crushing and tearing the cables and the pipeline simultaneously.
So the pattern of damage across three different vessels, linked to three different countries, all operating in NATO waters, targeting critical infrastructure.
Right.
It makes the pure accident theory statistically improbable.
Even with the 86% noise floor, yes, it strains credulity.
But the accident theory still provides the perfect shield. So what was the official rebuttal offered by the responsible parties?
The severe storm alibi. In the initial case of the new polar bear, Finnish investigators did recover a specific, identifiable piece of evidence. A large 6-ton anchor was lifted from the seabed right near the ruptured pipeline.
A smoking gun, or a smoking anchor.
Pretty much. The Chinese government eventually admitted its ship was responsible for the loss of that anchor. But their official explanation was simply that the anchor was lost during extreme weather. They blamed a severe storm and mechanical failure.
That is the perfect cover story because it is true that anchors are often lost in storms, and it aligns perfectly with the overwhelming statistical truth that anchors cause the vast majority of faults.
The boring truth becomes the lie.
It's powerful precisely because it's simple and boring. And while Western intelligence officials have internally speculated that Russia may have directed the Chinese ship's captain to accidentally drop the anchor,
There's no hard evidence. No smoking gun radio transmission to prove that intent. And the absence of that hard, direct evidence reinforces the plausible deniability perfectly.
So we arrive at the definition of the smoking anchor tactic. This is where the boring statistical truth is actively weaponized as a tool of statecraft.
It is textbook hybrid warfare. The tactic does not involve launching a torpedo or deploying a self-dive team, which would be an overt act of war, potentially triggering Article 5 of the NATO treaty.
Right.
The tactic is to use a commercial vessel, often part of a deniable shadow fleet, with its AIS tracker possibly turned off to obscure its track, and just accidentally drag its anchor over a key target.
And the drag distances are what make the accident claim forensically suspicious, even if they can't be legally refuted.
Absolutely. Analysis of the new Tony polar bears movement suggested the anchor may have been dragging across the seabed for distances as vast as 66 miles.
66 miles. No commercial vessel operating normally would drag an anchor for 66 miles.
Of course not. So when this happens, they claim the storm, they blame mechanical failure, or they simply claim the anchor was lost before they even got to the area. The physical act is commercial, the intent is military.
This is pure hybrid warfare. The goal is to inflict significant economic harm, disrupt critical infrastructure, and deter intervention all without giving the victim the necessary proof to trigger a direct military or diplomatic response.
The smoking anchor perfectly weaponizes that 86% accident statistic. It's the ultimate low-tech, high-impact weapon. It turns the seafloor's statistical certainty into a military doctrine.
Okay, let us move from the Baltic to the Pacific, where we see this gray zone tactic applied with incredible repetition, almost as a form of continuous political pressure. Case file 003, the Taiwan Strait. This looks like a sustained campaign. Some analysts are even calling it a war by 1,000 cuts.
The pressure applied here is less about one spectacular failure and more about cumulative, deniable deterioration.
Right.
Consider the specific incident in February 2023. The 14,000 residents of Taiwan's Matsu Islands, which are geographically very close to mainland China, suddenly lost internet access.
Complete blackout.
And the reason was definitive.
Right.
Both of their 2 operational submarine cables to the main island had been severed.
And the immediate culprits identified by Taiwanese authorities again fit the pattern.
Yes, they identified a Chinese fishing vessel and a Chinese cargo ship. Again, low-tech, easily deniable commercial or civilian vessels operating in a busy, contested waterway. The same mechanism. Suspected anchor drag or fishing gear fouling.
But what makes this case so distinct is the sheer frequency. This is not an isolated event. It is a pattern of harassment.
It is an astonishing pattern.
Yeah.
Taiwanese officials have reported an incredible 27 cable cuts in the highly localized waters around the 𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐏 Islands just since 2018.
27.
27. That level of repetition makes the accident explanation statistically ridiculous, even factoring in that the Taiwan Strait is one of the busiest maritime choke points in the world.
The numbers defy the 86% noise floor when they're confined to one specific tiny location like that.
They absolutely do. 𝐏𝐻, who's Taiwan's deputy digital minister, stated explicitly that the frequency and the timing make an accident highly improbable.
And he called it what?
He described the specific sequence: a vessel accidentally dropping an anchor and then accidentally engaging the engine to drag it along a charted cable path as a clear, repeatable gray zone tactic designed for attrition.
And China's official explanation, predictably, is simple, and it relies heavily on the core ICPC truth.
Yes. They just maintain that the Taiwan Strait is one of the world's busiest waterways, forcing countless vessel interactions, making accidents not just likely, but statistically inevitable. They stick rigorously to the 86% statistical truth. They argue Taiwan is just misinterpreting the natural chaos of a commercial maritime environment.
But what's intriguing here is that the ambiguity isn't just being created by the aggressor, it's also being reinforced by the victim's own internal reports.
This is where we see the concept of weaponizing ambiguity truly perfected. The strongest rebuttal to the sabotage claim is, in fact, not coming from Beijing, but sometimes from Taiwan's own telecommunications provider, Chunghwa Telecom, and its Ministry of Digital Affairs, MODODI.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, in more recent cable breaks near Matsu in early 2024, the official reports from Taiwan attributed the damage not to identified Chinese ships, but sometimes to natural deterioration and core wire aging.
Wait, so if the victim is publicly attributing the failure to aging rather than attack, they are gifting the aggressor with perfect deniability. Why would they do that?
It's likely a multifaceted decision. First, attributing everything to aging avoids an immediate high-stakes political escalation. Second, it allows the telecom provider to justify budget increases for maintenance and replacement.
Oh, okay.
But strategically, the result is the same. If the victim's official reports cannot definitively distinguish between accident, aging, and intentional attack, then the plausible deniability for the aggressor is absolute. It completely muddies the waters for any international condemnation or military response.
If you can't prove intent in a court of law or public opinion, you have no recourse.
Precisely. The goal isn't necessarily a physical knockout blow. It's to force the constant, expensive replacement of cables, to sow doubt, and to keep the victim in a perpetual state of heightened vulnerability without ever crossing the threshold of conventional warfare.
However, Taiwan is attempting to fight back against this ambiguity using a crucial legal maneuver by reclassifying these events.
That's right. In a specific 2025 incident involving a ship called the Hongtai 58, the captain was arrested by Taiwanese authorities for damaging a cable.
Okay.
A Taiwanese court subsequently convicted him and sentenced him to prison. This is a critical legal development. By prosecuting the captain, the government is publicly reclassifying these accidents as criminal offenses, vandalism, and economic sabotage.
That move attempts to peel away the statistical armor. It says, we don't care about the 86% rule. We are now treating the consequence of your actions as a crime, regardless of your alleged intent.
It directly challenges the premise of deniability by making the individual responsible legally liable. It creates a domestic deterrent that the international community often can't provide.
Okay, so the cumulative evidence from the Red Sea, the Baltic, and the Taiwan Strait points overwhelmingly toward the low-tech, clumsy, easily deniable anchor. But we still have that psychological itch, right? The proportionality bias. It demands a global war be fought with James Bond tools, not fishing gear.
And we must be intellectually honest. We have to confirm that the high-tech capability for true deep-sea sabotage is, in fact, very real and thoroughly documented by state actors.
Absolutely. Let's start with Russia, as they are often cited in the Baltic incidents. They operate the main Directorate of Deep Sea Research, or GUGI.
Because a highly secretive branch of the Russian Navy. Its public face is a fleet of dedicated research vessels. The most famous and most suspicious is the Yantar.
The Yantar.
The Yantar is less a research ship and more a mothership for dedicated, deep-diving military mini-submarines. These include the Rus and Consul-class submersibles, which are designed to operate at astonishing depths, up to 6,000 meters.
That's nearly 20,000 feet.
Right. And the U.S. Navy has publicly stated that these submersibles are unequivocally able to sever cables miles beneath the ocean's surface. They have the technology to do it with precision and with stealth.
And the Yantar has a documented history of loitering suspiciously near critical choke points. We've seen documented instances where it sat directly over critical transatlantic cables in the Irish Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean, and famously off the coast of the massive U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay.
China is also quickly developing this high-tech capability. In 2024, they officially unveiled a new ship explicitly designed with the capability to perform deep-sea operations, including cutting and retrieval at depths up to 4,000 meters.
So the capability is demonstrably there. The sophisticated tools exist, and the military doctrine calls for using them.
Right, this fits perfectly within the documented doctrine of hybrid warfare, or hybridная война in Russian strategic thought, which explicitly integrates the sabotage of critical national infrastructure to inflict economic harm without direct military engagement.
So if the capability is there, we have to ask the critical question. Is capability proof of intent?
No, it is not. And we must also acknowledge that the West has equally sophisticated capability. The United States Navy operates the USS Jimmy Carter.
A Seawolf-class nuclear submarine.
And the Jimmy Carter is unique in the world because of its 100-foot extension, built right into the hull, known as the Multi-Mission Platform, or MMP.
Which is highly classified.
Very. But naval analysts describe it essentially as an underwater splicing chamber. Critically, it's designed not primarily to crush or break cables, but to tap them.
To tap them.
To cut into the protective jacket, expose the fiber optics, splice in monitoring equipment, and then reseal the cable without leaving a trace. This capability is for intelligence gathering espionage, not destructive sabotage. And this is a subtle but crucial distinction.
And this leads us to the synthesis, the great red herring. We want the culprit to be the high-tech spy sub, but the hard, undeniable forensic evidence from the Baltic and the Red Sea points overwhelmingly to the low-tech, clumsy, deniable anchor.
This suggests a critical doctrinal distinction in how these tools are deployed. The high-tech assets, the Yantar, the Jimmy Carter, are likely reserved for espionage and tapping.
For listening?
For listening. They are intelligence-gathering platforms where stealth and precision are paramount. The goal is to listen, not to destroy.
Whereas destruction demands deniability above all else.
Exactly. The low-tech assets, the Shadow Fleet and their smoking anchors, are for sabotage and maintaining plausible deniability. Why use an expensive visible asset like a spy sub when you can achieve the same disruptive effect using a commercial vessel and then just blame the weather?
So the hybrid warfare doctrine is executed with the simplest, most deniable, and cheapest instrument possible, which weaponizes the ICPC statistics.
The case file we have built, spanning continents and conflicts, points overwhelmingly toward reality one, the world of accidents, or at least the appearance of accidents. The weight of that 86% statistic is almost insurmountable for prosecutors or diplomats trying to prove intent.
But
there is one case file, one single open wound that breaks this perfect statistical pattern and cannot be explained away by accident or storm or a dragging anchor. And it concerns the Svalbard archipelago in the high Arctic.
okay, so let's set the scene. Svalbard is a Norwegian territory extremely strategically important because of its proximity to the Arctic and Russian naval bases.
And before we focus on Svalbard itself, let's just mention the near-miss coincidence involving a nearby cable. In October 2022, cables near the neighboring Shetland Islands just north of Scotland were cut.
And the official report?
Predictably, blamed a UK fishing trawler.
The easiest, most boring explanation.
Always. But vessel tracking data showed that a specific Russian research ship, the Boris Petrov, was loitering in that exact vicinity at the exact time of the cut.
An uncomfortable coincidence.
An uncomfortable coincidence, yes, but still technically deniable under the 86% rule. They could simply say the trawler was unlucky.
The Svalbard cable cut of April 2021, however, is definitive. This is the forensic pattern breaker that defeats the accidental anchor theory entirely.
It is. When the cable, which connects the islands to the mainland and carries crucial satellite data, was recovered from the seabed for repair, the forensic evidence was undeniable. It was not crushed or broken by a dragging anchor.
An anchor leaves a very specific kind of damage.
It does, a wide area of compression damage and tearing. This wasn't that.
So if it wasn't an anchor, what was the mechanism of failure?
Investigators stated it was clearly cut with a power tool.
A power tool.
They concluded the cable had been brought onto a vessel and manually cut. This is a completely different operational signature. It requires stopping a vessel, deploying some form of mechanism, maybe a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, or a retrieval, hook pulling the cable on deck, sawing or using a sophisticated hydraulic cutter to sever the thick protective layers in the core.
And then just letting the two ends drop back down miles apart.
Exactly. That requires intentional manual action, not a storm and a loose anchor. That tool mark is the smoking gun that proves intentional sabotage exists, regardless of the ICPC statistics.
And was there a vessel of interest nearby?
At the time of that cut, vessel tracking data showed a Russian trawler had crossed over the cable.
A trawler again.
So we are left with the final complex reality. Most cuts are, statistically, accidents. That is the truth of the seabed. But the specific forensic evidence from Svalbard, the tool marks, confirms that some cuts are clearly intentional, manual sabotage. This one piece of physical evidence breaks the statistical cover that the aggressors rely on.
So we've arrived at the two contradictory realities that you, the listener, have to reconcile when assessing these global events.
Reality 1. The world of accidents. The ironclad ICPC statistics mean that cluster failures in the Red Sea, the Baltic, and the Taiwan Strait are all statistically defensible as accidents, amplified by our proportionality bias, because we demand a great cause for a great effect.
And reality 2, the world of intent. The incidents are clustered too perfectly in geopolitical hotspots. The vessels involved are consistently linked to deniable shadow fleets, and the anchor-dragging tactic aligns too perfectly with documented hybrid warfare doctrine. And Svalbard proves that intentional cutting is a reality, not just a theory.
We know the $10 trillion digital system is vulnerable to mundane failure, whether it's a 50-cent rubber O-ring or a 6-ton anchor. The vulnerability is structural, it's financial, and it's geopolitical.
But the final provocative thought to leave you with is this. If the most effective form of hybrid warfare is strategically designed to be statistically indistinguishable from an accident, then the true goal of this unseen war might not simply be to cut the cables.
What if the true goal is to force the West NATO countries, telecom companies, sovereign governments, to spend billions and billions of dollars hardening critical infrastructure against a $10 anchor?
While never being able to formally attribute the crime in a court of international law or diplomacy?
Exactly. The cost of maintaining plausible deniability is thus borne entirely by the victim, draining their resources and sowing doubt in their alliances.
Now that you have the complete case file, the tool marks, the statistics, and the smoking anchors, the judgment on whether this is calculated hybrid warfare or merely incredibly pervasive weaponized bad luck is entirely yours. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.